Cemeteries are another source of information about Roman Britain. House and Smith, Christianity in England from Roman times to the Reformation, so it's part one of his tome that has Christianity in England going all the way to the 20th century, notes that in some of the Roman era cemeteries there are phases of burial with little alignment, followed by phases with a west-east alignment, with the head at the west, feet at the east. Examples of this are seen in the cemetery at Colchester, and that seems to have had a Roman church as well, which was dated to 320 to 340. Indeed, I'm going to read a little bit of House and Smith, page 43. There are also cemeteries which are important in their own right. Much discussion has surrounded the identification of Christian as opposed to pagan cemeteries. So it's useful that Dorothy Watts has distinguished certain features which help to determine the Christian nature of cemeteries. They would be generally acceptable to other archaeologists, no doubt with reservations and qualifications, both small and great. This is what Dorothy Watts says. In a cemetery of, say, 30 or more inhumations, those criteria deemed essential for a Christian identity are burials west-east, that is, with the head in the west, undisturbed by other interments, supine, in my words, that's lying on the back, and extended, legs out, in a cemetery in which neonatal or very young infants are also buried and given equal respect with adults, with an absence of decapitated burials and of grave goods or vessels, animals and birds, and hobnailed footwear. It's also desirable there be an absence of coins in the mouth or charon's fee, although this may not be important. House and Smith goes on. Other criteria may be applied, such as Christian inscription in situ, also the existence of a contemporaneous pagan cemetery, or the presence of a mausoleum, a focal grave, or plaster burials. But not all these features, or any at all, may be present, and all are not of the same value as evidence, particularly plaster burials. And, of course, it's important to take account of the broader context of the cemetery concerned to see if there are signs of actual or potential Christian influence in the immediate environs. The cemeteries at Ancaster, Ashton, Bradley Hill, Breandown, Butt Road, Colchester, Cannington, the Crown Building site in Dorchester, Icklingham, Lamont Beacon, Lankills, Winchester, Nettleton, and Verulam Hill Field, St Albans, among the most important of the apparently Christian burial sites. He then goes on to bemoan the lack of work on Christian cemeteries of the period. How did Christianity get here? Well, it probably came with trade. As people moved goods, they moved ideas too. Christianity had good trade routes to Egypt, which is how that early style of monasticism took root here. But also England looked across the Channel to France. And in the book that I keep talking about, Nazareth to Northumbria, I posit a route for Christianity coming from Israel to Turkey with John, from Turkey to Lyon with Irenaeus, who was the bishop of Lyon for the Greek community, who had been consecrated by Polycarp of Smyrna, who in turn had been consecrated by John in Ephesus. And from that area of France we get Samian ware, and there's lots of evidence of that in this country. So I suggest that's how Christianity came here, and that's why Christianity in the 7th century, the Christianity that calls itself Celtic, claimed John as its apostle. The British Church wasn't immune to persecution. So in the mid-3rd century we had Alban martyred at Vericlanium, and we also had Aaron and Julius at Caerleon. British bishops were involved in the Council of the Church. Bishops from York, London and Lincoln went to the Council of Arles in 314, which was the first such council of Western bishops and was dealing with the Donatist issue. You'll hear more about that when we talk about Augustine of Hippo. British bishops didn't go to Nicaea. It was far too far away. But in 359, they were at the Council of Rimini. They were subsidised to get there by the Empire. The British Church was part of the Catholic Church, the Church of the whole world, but it was a poor part. Bede feared that the Church had been tainted by Arians, but Hilary of Poitiers, writing much closer in time to it in 358, congratulated Britain on resisting Arianism. Bede might have had his own reasons for suspecting the Celtic Church, but we'll come more to that later. The writings of Gildas in the 6th century and Bede of the 7th century refer back to this period, but of course they're not contemporary. But one author who did write at this time was Patrick. He wrote his Confessio at about 650, towards the end of his life. Patrick was British. He was a Britishman who was taken to Ireland. As he says for himself, I, Patrick, a sinner, a most simple countryman, the least of all the faithful, and the most contemptible of many, had for father the deacon Calpurnius, son of the late Potitus, a priest of the settlement of Banavem Tabernae. He had a small villa nearby where I was taken captive. I was at that time about 16 years of age. There he is, a child of a deacon, grandson of a priest, a boring Christian family where he was the bored teenage son, working out in the fields, when he gets captured by Irish raiders. And in his confession, he tells about how his time in captivity brought him back to God, how he escaped, took a boat to Gaul, and there he studied at the monastery of St. Martin of Tours, who has quite a big influence on the Celtic Church and the British Church at this time. It's not uncommon to find the lives of saints having their saint go to Tours for part of their education. After some years he returned home, and then he's recalled to Ireland by God in a dream where the Irish called him to come to them. The interesting thing about Patrick is that he was from a Christian family. His father and grandfather were clergy, a presence of Christians in Britain in his day. Indeed, Christianity in Ireland is developing this time, and you can go all over Ireland and find evidence of Christianity from the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries. The far side of Ireland, in West Kerry, there's a little place called Cahillahillan, just a farmstead, and up the hill an ancient ringford. In Cahillahillan there are 2 carved stones, and on one of these carved stones, dated to this period, is a cross, and the cross is on a background. The background is that of a liturgical fan, used to keep the flies off, used to keep the president cool. Not much needed in West Kerry, but sign of the influence of Greek Christianity all the way over in the far west of Ireland in this period. When the legions left in about 410, Christianity was probably still a minority religion, patchy in some areas, but in other areas, widespread. Mainly focused on the towns, probably, with paganism continuing in the countryside. Indeed, the term pagan is from the Latin pagus, countryside. It was the townies' view of countryside beliefs. Paganism may never have totally gone, and some see it as sublimated into folk Christianity. So do come back together, and we'll hear your reflections and your questions on this period of Christianity in Britain.